Three's the Charm by MissCHSparkles. Chapter 7. Before I get started, if you hear snoring in the background, my dog is in here with me, and she's fast asleep. So, and say hi to Fizzy, everybody. Harry's POV. Harry was idly reading one of his school books when he heard the front door slam, and a moment later a car door was also being slammed shut. He scooted along his bed and peered out the window. It looked like Uncle Vernon was heading out. It had been 2 days since he had returned his 11-year-old self, and so far, things were okay. He had made it back to Privet Drive all right, and the Dursleys had let him in. All his things were in his bedroom, which was starting to look like someone actually used it. Hedwig's cage stood empty. She was still out delivering letters to Ron and Hermione. And next summer, Harry was going to make sure she was never locked up. If things worked out, Uncle Vernon wouldn't even dare to suggest she be locked up. Harry was very hopeful that Sirius would be freed before the year was even out. And even if he had to spend some time with the Dursleys, he'd hopefully spend the rest of his second-year summer with Sirius. It was strange, thinking about Sirius. He was alive, but imprisoned in one of the worst places on Earth. He hated to think of Sirius there, but at least he'd get him out far earlier than third year. A part of him desperately wanted to grab Ron's rat and throw him to the authorities, but it would never work. They had to be sensible, or this could never work. They'd find a way to expose Wormtail, and Sirius's name would finally be cleared, and he could live his life as a free man. Harry smiled. It would be good to see Sirius free and happy. That was something he only gotten a glimpse of during his previous life. During 5th year, Sirius had been trapped in his house and had been miserable and grouchy. Harry hated to think of how badly his beloved godfather, but it was true. Not that he blamed him. Before he had won Kreacher's loyalty, Grimmauld Place had been a truly dreadful place to live. Of course, Sirius had always hated Kreacher, so they would have to find some way to make them both happy. Harry wasn't Kreacher's master anymore, but he didn't want him to be miserable. The elf had been a great friend to Harry and his friends. Maybe, if they destroyed the locket for Kreacher, that might also help thawing the cold elf. Also, surely, Sirius would want to hear how bravely his little brother had died, that he had fought for the light in the end. Maybe the fact they both cared for Regulus could bring Sirius and Kreacher together, but Harry really wasn't sure. He'd just have to see how things evolved. "Diddy?" He suddenly heard his aunt call. He had left his bedroom door open. "Would you like me to get you anything from the shops?" He heard a muffled reply from Dudley. Undoubtedly his cousin was listing the things he wanted. So far, his cousin had completely avoided him, perhaps scared he'd get Pig's ears to go with his tail. Harry did feel a bit sorry for Dudley. It must be pretty uncomfortable to sit on that. For Uncle Vernon, his sympathy went only so far, especially with the dirty looks he kept getting. At least his aunt and uncle were too scared of him to try anything, and possibly they were worried Hagrid might show up again. "I'll see you shortly, Didyums," Aunt Petunia cooed to her precious son before she headed to the car. Harry looked back out the window to see his aunt striding away, a large shopping bag in one hand. Should probably be a while. And this might be a perfect opportunity for him to spend a little time with Dudley. He smiled. In his previous life, he would never have imagined for a single moment he'd want to spend time with his cousin. Making sure his aunt wasn't about to come back after forgetting something, he put his book down and got off the bed, stretching as he did so. He had spent the last 2 days in his room, giving his family a lot of space and a chance to cool down. It wasn't too bad, since he understood a lot of the theory and the practical of the books. It was good to go over them again. He might even be able to satisfy Snape's questioning on the subject of potions, a feat barely anyone who wasn't Hermione managed. He bent and lifted the loose floorboard out and rifled through his large bags of sweets, choosing a few good ones, placing them on the bed and then replacing the floorboard in its place before heading downstairs. Judging by the sound of electrical explosions, Dudley was playing a computer game. Harry shook his head. How long had it been since he'd played one? 6, 7 years? It was another strange thing to think about. Sticking his head into the living room, he said cheerfully, "Hey, Dudley!" His cousin half yelped, half screamed, and tumbled backwards, legs and arms waving madly. Fighting back a grin, Harry asked in what he was hoping in a friendly voice, "Fancy coming up to my room, Dudley?" Dudley looked at him with an expression of horror, as though Harry had suggested that Dudley take a turn on the rack, with a few hot pokers thrown in for good measure. Very patiently, Harry said, "Dad, you do know I've been a wizard all my life?" As Dudley stared at him, Harry added, "And how many times in the last 10 years have I turned you into a toad?" Dudley opened his mouth before frowning deeply, as he realised that the correct answer was never, and yet it didn't feel right. He pondered it for a few minutes before staring at Harry again, obviously wanting to be told the answer. Harry smiled at him and said, I'm not going to turn you into anything if you really don't want to come upstairs." "I don't want to go," Dudley said promptly, and then flinched as though expecting Harry's wrath to rain down upon him. Harry shrugged casually and turned to leave, saying, "Well, I guess I'm just going to have to eat all those sweets on my own." Leaving the sitting room, he walked back up the stairs and disappeared into his room. After placing his book onto the bedside table, he relaxed against his pillow as he waited for his cousin to take the bait. It took a few minutes, but heavy thumps told him Dudley was trying to quietly come up the stairs. There was a pause, and then Dudley awkwardly peeped into the room, his picky eyes falling on the spread of sweets on the bed. "Dudley, what a surprise!" Harry exclaimed with a grin. "Come on in and join me." Dudley's head moved back and forth slightly, and then moved forward again, his fear of Harry warring with his greedy love of sweeties. Finally, he slowly lumbered into the room and stood there nervously. Harry indicated the bed, and Dudley came over and sat down with a thud, making the whole bed shake and groan. His eyes were still on the sweets, but they were so unfamiliar that he couldn't quite snatch them as he normally would. "Wanna try some Bertie Bott's every flavour beans?" Harry offered, holding the bag out for Dudley. Dudley stared into it, entranced by the different coloured sweets, before he slowly said, "What flavours you got?" "Every flavour, Dud," Harry said with a grin. "There are things like chocolate, raspberry, toffee, coffee, marmalade, salami, grass, liver, pepper, every kind of flavour you can get, including, if you're very unlucky, bogey or vomit flavour." "Why would you get those?" Dudley asked in complete confusion and disbelief. "That's the fun of it," Harry explained. "You've no idea what you'll get. You might get something you love, or something you hate. Sort of like Russian roulette, I suppose, but they're perfectly safe. You might get a disgusting flavour, but it won't make you ill or anything." "That's weird," Dudley declared, looking at each bean as though one might announce it was a nasty flavour. "Yeah, but it's fun," Harry said before grabbing a bright pink one, offering it to Dudley. He said, "Come on, this one looks safe. Have a taste. I promise it won't do anything." Dudley stared at it and then at Harry, perhaps trying to detect deception. When Harry just smiled encouragingly at him, Dudley seemed to decide he could take a chance. After all, sweets had never let him down in the past. Maybe he could trust them. He took the pink bean and popped it into his mouth, hesitantly chewing. A look of surprise came over his face, and he said, "That's candy floss." "Told you you'd like it," Harry said with a smile as he took a red one. "What's wrong?" Dudley said in alarm at the grimace Harry pulled. "Cinnamon," Harry said, his face a little screwed up. "Very strong flavour. Side note, been there, not fun. Nearly set my tongue on fire." "Oh," Dudley said slowly. "Okay. You can take another one," Harry prompted as Dudley sat there awkwardly. With a bit more confidence, Dudley took a darkish green one and popped it into his mouth. He chewed with more of a frown this time before saying, "What's this one?" "What does it taste like?" Harry asked as he popped a brown one into his mouth and discovered toast. "I dunno," Dudley mumbled. "It's like that stuff we get on roast chicken." "Might be a herb," Harry suggested. "Like rosemary or parsley, maybe?" Dudley shrugged. Apparently he couldn't tell. He grabbed a couple more and shoved them into his mouth. These flavours appeared to be pleasing as he grinned and noisily chewed. Harry helped himself to a few and ate them one by one. He preferred to taste the separate flavours. His cousin seemed to be enjoying himself, and he took it as a good sign. There was a silence for a few minutes, until Dudley suddenly shifted uncomfortably. Harry glanced at it and realised Dudley's tail was probably bothering him. "You okay?" "Yeah," Dudley grunted, before hesitating and giving Harry a hopeful look. "Can you get rid of it?" Harry shook his head. He didn't know how much control he had over his wand, and he didn't want to risk causing injury. As Dudley looked crestfallen, Harry said slowly, "I can't get rid of it because it's too advanced for me. But I could write to Hogwarts and explain we had an accident. They could send someone who could get rid of it properly, and you wouldn't have to go to the hospital or anything." "Could you?" Dudley asked eagerly, leaning forward. "Sure," Harry said with a nod. "As soon as Hedwig gets back, I'll send her with a letter." Dudley frowned. Harry added, "Hedwig's my owl. In the wizarding world, owls are used to send letters." "Why?" Dudley said bluntly. "Don't know. It's just how they do things," Harry said with a shrug. "But she'll find Hogwarts. That's my school. No problem." "Has she ever been there?" Dudley asked, and Harry shrugged. "Don't know, but she will get there. Don't worry." "How can she go to a place she's never been?" Dudley asked, very bemused. Harry grinned. "Magic, Dad. That's how." "Oh," Dudley said in understanding, although the expression on his face indicated he didn't really understand. "But I think we'd better keep this between ourselves," Harry now said seriously. "You know Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia won't be happy, but I'm sure I can get someone here who'll fix everything. But if anyone does ask how it happened, just blame me." "But it was that giant guy," Dudley said with a frown. "Yeah, but I don't want him getting into trouble," Harry explained. "He didn't really mean to. He just lost his temper." "But will you get in trouble?" his cousin asked slowly. "Nah," said Harry. "It was accidental magic, so I might get a lecture, nothing more." Dudley was frowning very hard. He looked like he often did when presented with a maths question. Harry ate another couple of beans, while Dudley tried to work something out. "But you could get in trouble," Dudley finally said. "Why would you do that?" "Because Hagrid's my friend," Harry said patiently. "Because he would be in a lot more trouble than I will be, so I don't mind covering for him." "Oh," Dudley said, still very bemused. Harry knew the concept of being altruistic might take a while to sink through Dudley's learned selfish behaviour, but he was hopeful it would eventually. As his cousin sat there, still thinking about what Harry had said, the black-haired boy glanced out the window. It was a rather dull day, and Harry was debating whether or not he'd take a walk later. Seeing that his cousin still looked confused, Harry said, "Tell you what, Dudley, why don't we do this again?" As Dudley looked at him, he explained, "When your parents aren't about, you can come and try some more sweets. I don't think they would approve of these, and Aunt Petunia might chuck all the sweets away." Dudley's eyes widened. He did not like the sound of that. Harry smiled. Dudley could keep some things from his parents, and he was very optimistic about him keeping this one. Maybe, in time, they could actually get to know each other, and perhaps Dudley might even want to receive letters from Harry. It was a bit of a long shot, but Harry did want to try and help Dudley become the man he had last seen before his Horcrux hunt. It would probably take a while. Dudley was only here because he loved sweets so much, but that didn't mean it wouldn't happen. At the very least, Harry did want to encourage Dudley to lose weight and become fitter, and even get him into boxing sooner. although he had a slight reservations about bully Dudley being able to hit better and harder. But without a doubt, Dudley had loved his sport, and it had been a positive focus for him. If Harry could become his friend, then he could help his cousin realise that he gained nothing from being a bully. "You should probably go and get back to the game," Harry suggested. "Don't know when Aunt Petunia will get back." Dudley nodded and got up, but paused. "You'll give me more sweets?" "If you don't tell anyone, yes," Harry said with a nod. "Some are more exciting, but they can't hurt you." Dudley nodded again and lumbered for the door, but then he paused again. "And you'll send that owl to that school?" "As soon as she gets back," Harry promised. "I'll even show you the letter, and we can send her off together. It might take her a few days. She'll have to go all the way to the north of Scotland, but she will get there." "You better be right," Dudley said, and while he was still too wary of Harry to sound really threatening, there was still a hint of a warning. "Believe me, Dad, I am," Harry said with quiet confidence. "The wizarding world doesn't want muggles finding out about them, and your tale could raise suspicions. Only direct family members of witches and wizards are allowed to know about us." Harry paused and then said, "I'm pretty sure I don't have to tell you that if you tried telling anyone about me, no one would believe you. But you really don't want to get mixed up with the Ministry of Magic. But soon I'll be at school, and you'll be at yours. You won't have to think about me until next summer." "Yeah," Dudley said, but he sounded a little unsure. He continued out of the room, and Harry was left by himself. Harry sighed and grabbed his book. That had gone better than he expected. He wondered who would be sent to fix Dudley and Uncle Vernon's tales. Probably Professor McGonagall, as she was the expert on transfiguration. It would be good to see her, or even any teacher of Hogwarts, even Snape, if only because it would be interesting to see how his aunt reacted. Harry grinned. It would be a pretty funny sight indeed. Ron's POV. Apparently, you couldn't go wrong with pancakes, one of the easiest dishes out there. Apparently, Ron could go completely and utterly wrong with them. He stared angrily at the burnt yet sticky mess that should have been a tasty pancake. He didn't understand what he had done wrong. He mixed all the ingredients together after picking out eggshells and breaking apart the lumps of flour, and then adding some butter to a drying pan, allowing it to melt before pouring in some of the batter. All he'd needed to do then was to let it cook, and then eat it. How had that gone wrong? "I don't believe this!" Ron exclaimed in frustration, picking away the burnt pancake with a spatula. "Something wrong, Ron?" his mother asked, bustling over. "It didn't work," Ron said mulishly, poking at the globe. "Oh well, never mind," she said soothingly, vanishing the mess with a wave of her wand. "You'll get the hang of it, don't worry." Ron grunted, feeling very disheartened. His mum had been very bemused when he'd come over with the request that he wanted to be taught how to cook. After all, she was the cook of the family, and none of her children or husband ever went hungry. Why would Ron want to cook? He told her that he knew that Muggle kids could cook, and he just really fancied learning how. When his dad heard this, he'd been very enthusiastic about the idea of Ron learning a Muggle skill. Ron couldn't cook quite like his mum could, because he wasn't yet allowed to use magic, but that didn't mean she couldn't teach him a few things. After all, there was no harm in teaching him, and it could be a hobby that would eat up some time until Ron went to Hogwarts. Everyone, even Percy, got twitchy in the last month before going back to Hogwarts. The build-up of excitement was almost unbearable. The twins raced about a lot more, spending as much time on their brooms as possible to work off the pent-up energy, while Percy spent even more time studying. Ginny was in a bit of a sulky mood, bemoaning the fact that the last of her brothers was leaving her behind. Ron knew she'd get over it, but he also knew that it was hard. He'd always hated seeing his brothers off to Hogwarts, but he'd always had Ginny for a playmate and company. She'd been completely on her own for almost a year, not counting the Christmas holiday in Romania where she'd been with Charlie. Ron smiled wryly at that. Once he might have been jealous, but after riding an actual dragon... Not so much. Why don't you try again? His mother was now suggesting. Just to make sure the pan is nice and hot, and then pour just enough to coat the bottom of it. Then you wait until the top looks cooked, and try to flip it with your spatula. Okay, Mum, Ron said, vaguely wondering if he had ever managed to get the hang of this cooking lark. At this rate, it really would take him 6 years before he could safely call himself a cook. Sighing, he added more butter to the clean pan and put it back over the heat. He'd be eating his own pancakes by the end of the day if it killed him. Watching the butter melt, he wondered about the letter he'd sent to Hermione and how she'd receive it. Hermione's POV. Hermione sighed as she happily perused the new book while stroking her purring cat. This very day, she and her parents had gone to Diagon Alley and completed Hermione's Hogwarts shopping. And, as she'd promised herself, she convinced her parents to let her buy a pet, and had managed to buy Crookshanks. Her loyal ginger cat had been very pleased to see her, and she wondered if somehow he'd gone back in time. It was impossible to work out, and she was just glad she had him again. She'd dearly missed him during the hunt. His presence was always comforting. He'd given his new home a once-over, rubbing madly against any sharp objects he found, before deciding that it was acceptable. Her parents seemed to think he'd be company for her while she was away. A part of them was worried she might have trouble making friends. She smiled widely. She couldn't wait to write to them and tell them all about her new friends. After that first Halloween, it had been so good to describe in great detail about the 2 boys she had made friends with, and she had happily received a reply of congratulations. Maybe, this time, her parents and the Weasleys could spend more time together. It had saddened her as the years went on, as she spent more time with Ron's family than her own. There had always been good reasons why, but it had still been painful to be increasingly away from them. It won't be like that this time, she said firmly to herself, as she allowed Crookshanks to purr in excitement. This time we'll all be together. Her ginger cat merely stretched, rolling and curling up into a tight ball, making Hermione laugh. She tickled his cheek before focusing again on her book, which was on healing. The bookkeeper had been rather surprised at all the different books she wanted. Most first-years only got what was on the book list. The first time around, she had gotten extra books to do some background reading on the new world she was entering, but this time she had gone further. Not only had she gotten her school books, she also got one on basic healing, a brief summary of wizarding lore, a book of runes, a couple on defense, Hogwarts a history, naturally, and arithmancy. Just because she couldn't take a couple of subjects until 3rd year didn't mean she couldn't swat up on them beforehand. Thankfully, her parents had been happy to get them for her. They wanted her to be as prepared as possible for going away to this strange new school. She'd never been one for buying flashy new gadgets. Books were the only things she really splashed out on, and it was still cheaper to buy than some of the kids from her primary. The bookkeeper had still felt the need to question why a little first year would want books like these. Hermione just calmly explained that she wanted to learn as much as possible, and she was interested in all these subjects. The man had blinked before murmuring something about Ravenclaw. What did he mean by that? Her dad had asked, not sure if that was some kind of insult. Oh, he just thinks that's the house I'll go to, Hermione explained. Ravenclaws are supposed to be very clever and love studying. You'll probably will go there then. Her dad had laughed, giving her shoulders a squeeze. We'll see, Hermione had replied with a smile. She hadn't really thought about houses. She just thought of herself as a Gryffindor. She figured she could discuss it with the boys. She wasn't concerned with thinking about other houses right now. At the moment, she was waiting for the letters from Ron and Harry. She suspected that Harry would write to Ron first, since Ron would probably be in need of the most reassurance. She couldn't imagine what it would be like to lose a brother like that, and then find that he was alive. Of course, she had thought she lost Harry, but it wasn't quite the same. They hadn't been anywhere near Harry's body, and he'd only been dead for 5 minutes. Fred's body, however, had been laid out, and they'd all seen how still and cold he was. They'd had time to accept that he was truly gone and never coming back. Well, until they'd gone back in time, that is. This could get a bit confusing, she sighed, examining the page on treating bites. She was determined that this time around, at least one of them would be an expert on dealing with injuries and the like. As long as she learned the most important parts, the boys could pick it up from her. She was pretty sure they would like to learn a bit, after all the horrible injuries they'd received, so she wouldn't have to worry about nagging them. Hermione smiled. It would be nice to just have to worry about whether or not they'd put effort into their homework again. That was the sort of thing she wanted to worry about again, not whether they'd live another day. Hopefully even the boys would be able to do better on their schoolwork this time around. Huh? She suddenly exclaimed as Crookshanks sat bolt upright, staring at the slightly open window. She stood up and cautiously walked over. What had gotten her cat's attention? To her relief, she spotted a familiar shape of a snowy white owl soaring towards her. Eagerly she shoved her window open and waited for Hedwig to fly in, which the owl did so very gracefully. "Hedwig!" she greeted with a wide smile as Hedwig came to rest on a bedpost, well out of reach of Crookshanks, who was eyeing the new arrival with interest. The owl ruffled her feathers before presenting a leg containing 2 letters. One from Harry and one from Ron. Her heart started to pound. Finally, she had words from her 2 best friends. But just what did those letters contain? End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this. I like this. All 3 of them are quietly progressing in ways they didn't before. Harry with linking up with Dudley, Ron with his cooking, and Hermione with healing. I really, really like that. That's really great. But my throat's tickling like egg. I've been recovering from a cold since just after Christmas. And let me tell you, the cough, like breathing, literally tickles. Ugh. And I'm sorry again if you could hear snoring. I love my dog, but she can be rather loud. But I didn't have time to go upstairs. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe. Check me out on Twitter, Coffee, and Patreon as well. And remember to have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.